Marcus Johnson, a highly successful CEO, thought he had built a company where everyone felt valued and respected. But when employee satisfaction plummeted, complaints of favoritism, toxic work culture, and racism started piling up. What Marcus uncovered when he went undercover in his own company would shock him to his core. Posing as a low-level receptionist, he witnessed the kind of toxic behavior and blatant discrimination that he never imagined would exist in his own business. And what happened when he finally revealed his identity to the staff? Let's just say instant karma followed. But before we get to that, let's take a look at how it all started. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you like this story, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is going to be just as special. Marcus sat at his desk, staring blankly at the bustling city skyline beyond his office window. Normally, the view filled him with pride, a daily reminder of what he had accomplished. His rise from humble beginnings to the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, Tech Vision. But today, his mind was far from the towering skyscrapers and the bright future they symbolized. Instead, he was focused on the report sitting on his desk, its pages filled with troubling numbers and complaints that gnawed at his conscience. For the third consecutive month, Tech Vision's employee satisfaction numbers had dropped. At first, Marcus had brushed it off as a temporary issue, perhaps the result of a stressful project or a company-wide shift in priorities. But as the complaints continued to pour in about favoritism, toxic work culture, and even allegations of racism, he knew something deeper was wrong. And worse, it had all been happening right under his nose. How had things spiraled so far out of control? He prided himself on being a hands-on leader, someone who listened to his employees and fostered a culture of inclusion and respect. Yet the data before him suggested otherwise. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples in frustration. A 15% drop in satisfaction at his Virginia office alone wasn't just alarming, it was a red flag. Complaints about certain senior managers, people Marcus had personally hired and trusted, hinted at a toxic environment he had been unaware of. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear that there was only one way to truly understand what was happening within his company. He needed to go undercover, to experience life as one of his employees, away from the CEO's chair and executive boardrooms. The decision wasn't an easy one. Marcus knew the risks involved. If his staff found out about his undercover operation, it could damage the trust they had in him as a leader. Worse still, if the media got wind of it, the whole thing could turn into a public relations disaster. But Marcus couldn't stand idly by while his employees suffered. He had worked too hard to build Tech Vision into a place where people from all backgrounds could thrive. Sitting in his office, Marcus weighed his options. He could send HR or an external consultant to investigate the problem, but that wouldn't get him the truth. His employees would be on their best behavior, knowing that they were being watched. No, Marcus needed something more direct, something that would allow him to see his company through their eyes. An idea began to take shape. What if he went undercover, took on a low-level role where he could blend into the background and observe without anyone knowing who he really was? It was risky, but it was also the only way to get an unfiltered look at what was going on. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Tech Vision was a large company, spread across multiple offices, with employees at every level. It would be easy enough to slip in as a new hire without anyone noticing. But what role would he take? He couldn't be too close to senior management. That would risk someone recognizing him. No, he needed to be in a position where he could see and hear everything without drawing attention to himself. A receptionist. It was perfect. Receptionists were the first point of contact for visitors and employees alike. They heard the conversations in the hallways, the complaints, the casual comments that revealed what people really thought about their work. And best of all, they were often overlooked, treated as invisible by those higher up the ladder. Marcus's mind raced as he began to formulate his plan. He would go undercover as a receptionist at his Virginia office, the place where the complaints were most concentrated. He would adopt a new identity, wear a simple uniform, and see for himself what was really going on. It would be a week-long experiment, just long enough to gather the information he needed without raising suspicion. With his decision made, Marcus felt a sense of relief. He had always believed in leading by example, and now he was putting that belief into action. But as he began to prepare for his undercover mission, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at the back of his mind. What would he uncover? And once he knew the truth, would he be able to fix it? The next morning, Marcus stood in front of his bedroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Gone was the sharp, tailored suit that had become his daily armor as CEO. In its place was a simple uniform, a pair of plain khakis, a button-up shirt, and a name tag that read Mike. He had swapped his polished Oxford shoes for scuffed loafers, and he had even gone so far as to grow a scruffy beard and don a pair of glasses to further mask his identity. He felt different. Stripped of the symbols of authority and power that usually defined him, Marcus realized that he was about to step into a world where none of his achievements mattered. To his employees, he wouldn't be the CEO. They wouldn't even know who he was. He was just Mike, the new receptionist, there to answer phones and greet visitors. The thought both excited and terrified him. It had been years since he had worked in an entry-level job, and the last time he hadn't been treated well. The memories of being undervalued and underestimated as a young black man in corporate America were still fresh in his mind, even after all his success. Would he face the same treatment now, even though he was running the company? He took a deep breath, adjusting his glasses one last time before leaving his apartment. Today was the start of something new. He was going to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. As Marcus drove to the Virginia office, he mentally prepared himself for the week ahead. He knew he couldn't let his guard down, not even for a second. Every interaction, every conversation would be important. He had to observe without drawing attention, listen without reacting. It was going to be a challenge, but Marcus was ready. When Marcus arrived at the office, he walked in through the main entrance, unnoticed by the bustling employees rushing past him. No one gave him a second glance. The front desk, where he would be spending the next week, sat at the far end of the lobby, a modest station with a single computer and a phone that was already ringing. Marcus hesitated for a moment, taking in his surroundings. The office was much like the other Tech Vision buildings, modern, sleek, with open workspaces and glass walls that allowed for transparency. But as Marcus settled into his role at the front desk, he realized that transparency wasn't always a guarantee. And so Mike, the receptionist, began his first day on the job. Marcus hadn't worked at the front lines in years, but it didn't take long for him to feel the strain. As soon as he sat at the desk, the phone began ringing nonstop. Questions about meetings, clients asking for updates, calls from vendors. It was a whirlwind of activity, and he was expected to juggle it all seamlessly. Even for someone used to the high-pressure environment of a CEO, the reception desk was a different kind of challenge. After a couple of hours on the job, Marcus started to notice something more troubling than the constant phone calls. He watched how people interacted around him, and more specifically, how they treated him. He was just Mike, the receptionist now, far removed from the respect and deference his employees usually showed him. No one knew who he was, and that gave him a front-row seat to their true personalities. Early in the morning, two senior managers, Tom from HR and Amanda, a project director, lingered near the front desk. They chatted loudly as if Marcus weren't even there, making it easy for him to overhear the conversation. "Did you see the email from corporate about the new cuts?" "Yeah, just what we needed, right? Another excuse to overwork the lower-level people? They're going to hate it. Not my problem. If they can't handle the pressure, they shouldn't be here in the first place." Their casual tone struck Marcus like a blow. He knew cuts were sometimes necessary in business, but the indifference in their voices, especially Tom, someone who should be in charge of employee well-being, was unsettling. How could they speak so lightly about putting more strain on the very people who kept the company running? As they walked away, laughing about the situation, Marcus felt a knot of discomfort tighten in his chest. He'd hired these people. He had trusted them with the responsibility of leading the company in his absence. Was this really how they spoke about their teams behind closed doors? If so, what kind of culture had he unknowingly allowed to fester? As the morning progressed, Marcus continued to observe the dynamics of the office. It wasn't just Tom and Amanda. There was a subtle hierarchy at play, with the higher-level employees walking through the lobby with an air of superiority. Some didn't even make eye contact with Marcus as they passed him by, treating him as though he were invisible. He watched as Doris, the veteran receptionist who had been at the company for years, expertly handled multiple tasks at once. She was warm and friendly with every person who approached the desk, whether they were a senior executive or a temp. Doris had an air of patience about her that Marcus deeply admired, but it also seemed like she had grown accustomed to being ignored by the upper management. During a short break between phone calls, Doris leaned over and whispered to Marcus, "Don't let it get to you, Mike. Up there, we're invisible. Just keep your head down, do your job, and don't expect anyone to notice." Her words hit him like a gut punch. Doris's years of experience had taught her that people in her position weren't valued, no matter how hard they worked. It was just a job to them, and she had come to accept that. But to Marcus, it was more than just a job. It was his company. He had always prided himself on running a business where every employee mattered, but clearly, that wasn't the reality. A part of him wanted to protest, to tell Doris that things were going to change. But how could he, as Mike the receptionist, explain that to her without revealing his true identity? All he could do was nod and keep working. As lunchtime approached, Marcus found himself alone at the front desk, with Doris stepping out for her break. The office seemed to quiet down, and Marcus finally had a moment to catch his breath. But the momentary calm was interrupted by a voice. Linda, one of the senior managers Marcus had heard glowing reviews about from his board, stormed up to the reception desk, her eyes scanning the mess of papers and phones ringing off the hook. "What on earth is going on here? How is this desk such a disaster? Papers everywhere, calls coming in nonstop, and you're just sitting there. This is completely unacceptable." Her tone was harsh, and she didn't hold back her frustration. Marcus could feel the weight of her words as she scolded him for something that wasn't even entirely his fault. He was doing his best to manage the front desk under overwhelming circumstances, but Linda didn't care. She didn't ask questions or try to understand the situation. She just assumed incompetence. "I've never seen such a mess. No wonder things are falling apart around here. It's because people like you can't even do the basics right." Marcus clenched his jaw, fighting back the anger bubbling inside him. "People like you?" What did that even mean? The words were sharp, and they cut deep. For years, Marcus had fought against the stereotypes and assumptions placed on him as a black man in corporate America. Now, here he was, being treated like he was less than, simply because of his temporary position as a receptionist. Linda didn't wait for a response. She turned and stormed off, her superiority intact, leaving Marcus feeling both furious and defeated. How many other employees had faced this kind of treatment? How many times had Linda or others like her belittled someone because of their position or their background? As Marcus sat there processing what had just happened, he noticed Henry, an IT worker, quietly watching the scene from across the lobby. Henry had always been known for his kindness, and it was clear he didn't approve of Linda's behavior. As she disappeared down the hall, Henry approached Marcus. "Don't take it too personally, man. That's just how she is. Doesn't matter who you are, she treats everyone like that." There was a sadness in Henry's voice, as if he had seen this behavior too many times before. Marcus appreciated the empathy, but it didn't make the situation any less painful. Henry's words confirmed what Marcus had feared. This wasn't a one-time incident. It was part of a larger pattern, a toxic culture that had gone unchecked for too long. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Marcus did his best to focus on his tasks, but his mind kept drifting back to Linda's words and the realization that his company, his vision, had strayed far from the values he thought it embodied. By the end of the day, Marcus's body was exhausted from the physical demands of the job, but the real weight came from the emotional toll of what he had witnessed. As he left the office, still in his Mike disguise, he couldn't help but wonder how he had let things get this bad. The toxic culture had been festering under his leadership, and now it was up to him to fix it. But first, he needed to see more. The next morning, Marcus returned to his temporary role as Mike with renewed determination. He had only scratched the surface of what was happening in his company, and the deeper he dug, the more troubling things became. His mind kept circling back to Linda's outburst the previous day, the dismissive attitudes of senior management, and the way Doris had quietly accepted her invisibility. How many more employees were silently enduring this toxic environment? How had it gone unnoticed by him for so long? He settled in at the front desk once again, answering phones and greeting visitors. The routine was the same, but now Marcus was hyper-aware of the way people interacted around him. Every comment, every glance held meaning. He could see the subtle hierarchy at play, the way certain employees were valued more than others based on their rank, or worse, their background. As the morning wore on, he began to notice patterns, small, almost imperceptible things that spoke volumes about the culture that had taken root in the company. Senior managers like Linda and Tom moved through the office with an air of entitlement, rarely acknowledging the lower-level staff unless it was to reprimand or criticize. Meanwhile, employees like Doris, Angela, and Henry worked tirelessly in the background, their efforts going unnoticed. Around midday, Marcus had a chance to observe Angela, a senior accountant who had been with the company for years. From everything he had heard, she was one of the most dedicated employees at Tech Vision, consistently producing high-quality work and staying late to ensure everything was perfect. But as Marcus watched her interact with her colleagues, he noticed something troubling. Angela, despite her hard work and professionalism, seemed almost invisible to the management team. As she walked through the office, her body language was tense, her shoulders slightly hunched as if she were carrying a heavy burden. She moved quickly and efficiently, but there was no sense of recognition for her efforts. No one stopped to thank her for staying late or compliment her on a job well done. Instead, they barely glanced in her direction, as if she were just another cog in the machine. Later that day, Marcus overheard a conversation between Angela and a colleague. She was clearly frustrated, her voice low but filled with emotion. "I've been passed over for a promotion 3 times now. 3. And I'm working harder than ever. I stay late, I come in early, but it doesn't matter. It's like I'm invisible unless I'm in the right social circle." Her colleague nodded sympathetically, but Marcus could hear the resignation in Angela's voice. She wasn't just frustrated, she was exhausted. Exhausted from giving so much and getting so little in return. Marcus felt a pang of guilt as he listened. How many times had people like Angela been overlooked because of a system that favored social connections over merit? It was clear to him now that the culture of favoritism extended far beyond just a few toxic individuals like Linda and Tom. It was woven into the very fabric of the company. And while people like Angela worked themselves to the bone, those at the top continued to climb the ladder with ease, regardless of their actual contributions. As the day went on, Marcus kept a close eye on Henry as well. Henry, the friendly IT worker, had caught Marcus's attention the previous day with his calm and empathetic demeanor. Today, Marcus noticed how Henry moved from desk to desk, solving technical issues with a smile and a reassuring word for everyone. It wasn't just his technical skills that impressed Marcus. It was the way Henry treated people. He never rushed through a problem, never acted as if someone's concerns were beneath him. Instead, he patiently explained solutions, making sure each person understood what he was doing. At one point, Marcus saw Henry helping a new intern who was clearly struggling with her computer. She looked flustered, on the verge of tears. But Henry approached her with the same calmness he showed everyone else. "It's okay. We'll figure it out together. Don't worry." For the next hour, Henry sat with the intern, walking her through the steps to fix the issue, and even teaching her basic troubleshooting skills. By the end of it, the intern's face had brightened, and she thanked Henry profusely. Marcus couldn't help but smile as he watched the interaction. This was the kind of employee tech vision should be rewarding. Someone who not only did their job well, but also lifted the spirits of those around them. And yet Henry, like Angela, was stuck in a lower-level role, his talents and potential largely overlooked. Marcus knew what was happening. People like Linda were rewarded for their ability to play the game, to navigate office politics and present themselves well to the higher-ups. But people like Henry and Angela, who genuinely cared about their work and their colleagues, were left behind. By the end of the day, Marcus felt the weight of his undercover experience bearing down on him. He had expected to find some problems within the company, but this was worse than he had imagined. The culture wasn't just toxic, it was deeply flawed at its core. And the worst part? He had been blind to it for years. That evening, as Marcus removed his uniform and returned to his role as CEO, he couldn't shake the image of Angela's tired face or Henry's kind smile. He had seen enough to know that things needed to change, but he wasn't ready to confront his team just yet. There was still more to learn, more to understand before he could take action. As Marcus reflected on the day, he realized that the solution wouldn't be as simple as firing a few toxic managers. The problems at TechVision were systemic, and it would take a complete overhaul of the company's culture to fix them. But he was determined. He wasn't going to let his company continue down this path of favoritism, discrimination, and neglect. The next day, Marcus would dive even deeper, seeking out the hidden voices in the company, the employees who had been ignored, overlooked, and silenced. He needed to hear their stories, to understand what they had been through, if he was going to make real lasting change. The next day, Marcus arrived at the office feeling a sense of anticipation. He knew that this would be another intense day of observation, but he was determined to uncover more of the hidden problems within his company. He had already seen the toxic behavior of senior managers like Linda and Tom, and he had witnessed the quiet resilience of employees like Doris, Angela, and Henry. But there was more to this story. He could feel it. As he sat at the reception desk, Marcus decided to focus on the employees who usually flew under the radar. The ones who weren't in the spotlight, who worked behind the scenes but played vital roles in keeping the company running smoothly. He wanted to understand their experience, to hear their voices that had long been silenced or ignored. Mid-morning, Marcus noticed Samantha, a mid-level customer service representative, walking through the lobby, her face tight with stress. She was carrying a stack of paperwork, moving quickly as if she were trying to outrun the mounting pressure of her job. She barely glanced up as she passed the reception desk, her attention entirely focused on getting through the day. Curious, Marcus made a mental note to keep an eye on her. From what he'd gathered, the customer service department had been struggling for months. Complaints about workload, stress, and lack of support had been piling up, and he wanted to know why. A few hours later, during a brief lull in phone calls, Marcus saw an opportunity. Samantha was standing near the coffee machine, pouring herself a cup of coffee, and he approached her cautiously. "Hey, you look like you've got a lot on your plate. Everything okay?" Samantha gave him a tired smile, clearly appreciative of the small gesture. "It's been rough, to be honest. The workload just keeps piling up, and every time we think we're catching up, there's another wave of complaints to deal with. It's like we're constantly drowning, and no one seems to care." Marcus could hear the frustration in her voice. She was clearly overworked, and the support she needed from management was nowhere to be found. "That sounds exhausting. Have you talked to anyone about it? HR, maybe?" Samantha sighed, shaking her head. "Yeah, a bunch of us have filed complaints, but nothing ever changes. I feel like we're just numbers to them. As long as we're hitting targets, they don't care how burned out we are." Her words struck Marcus hard. He had prided himself on creating a company where employees felt valued. But here was yet another example of how far Tech Vision had strayed from that vision. Samantha wasn't just overworked, she was disillusioned, feeling like her efforts and well-being didn't matter. As they talked, Marcus learned more about the customer service department's struggles. Samantha described how the team had been cut in half a year ago due to budget constraints, but the workload had only increased. They were expected to handle more calls, more complaints, and more issues with fewer resources, and the stress was taking a toll on everyone. "It's gotten so bad that people are quitting left and right. I've thought about it myself, honestly. I love the work, but I can't keep going like this. It's too much." Marcus could feel the weight of her words. It wasn't just a matter of fixing the workload. He needed to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by neglect. His employees were being pushed to their limits, and the company's focus on hitting targets had blinded management to the human cost. After their conversation, Marcus made his way back to the front desk, his mind swirling with thoughts. He knew the customer service department had been struggling, but hearing it directly from Samantha made it all the more real. He could no longer ignore the fact that his company's focus on numbers and efficiency had come at the expense of the people who made Tech Vision run. Later in the day, Marcus had another eye-opening encounter, this time with Javier, one of the custodial staff. Javier had been working at Tech Vision for several years, but like Doris, he often went unnoticed by the higher-ups. Marcus had seen him quietly moving through the amas, cleaning up after employees, fixing things that were broken, and keeping the place running smoothly without ever demanding recognition. That afternoon, as Javier was cleaning the lobby, Marcus struck up a conversation with him. "Hey, Javier, you've been here a long time, haven't you?" Javier smiled, pausing his work. "Yeah, it's been about 7 years now. Hard to believe sometimes. Feels like yesterday I started." Marcus nodded, intrigued. "You've seen a lot of changes over the years, huh? How's it been lately?" Javier's smile faded slightly, and he glanced around as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "Things have been different, you know? It's not like it used to be. Back when I started, people cared more about each other. There was more respect. But now, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like we're just here to get the job done, and no one really cares how it gets done." Marcus's heart sank. Once again, he was hearing the same sentiment, that the company had lost its heart, its sense of respect for the people who work there. "I've seen a lot of good people come and go. Some of them left because they couldn't take it anymore. And the ones who stayed, well, we just keep our heads down and do the work. Not much else we can do, right?" Javier's words mirrored Doris's earlier comments. It was the same story over and over again. Longtime employees who had once felt proud of their work now felt invisible and overlooked. They had resigned themselves to a culture where their contributions went unrecognized, where the human element of the job had been stripped away. As Marcus walked back to the front desk, his mind was racing. Javier's perspective was invaluable. He was someone who had been in the company long enough to see the shift in culture firsthand. And like Samantha, he had been left to fend for himself in a system that no longer valued him. By the end of the day, Marcus had seen enough. The problems at Tech Vision weren't isolated to a few bad managers. They were systemic. The culture of favoritism, overwork, and neglect had permeated every level of the company, and it was affecting everyone, from customer service reps to custodial staff. But the question remained, how had this happened? And more importantly, how could Marcus fix it? As he left the office that evening, his mind was filled with plans. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to make things right. He couldn't change the past, but he could reshape the future, starting with the employees who had been overlooked for far too long. Tomorrow, Marcus would continue his undercover work, But he knew that the time to reveal his true identity was fast approaching. He needed to confront his management team, to hold them accountable for the toxic culture that had taken root. And when he did, there would be consequences for everyone involved. The following morning, Marcus arrived at the office with a sense of purpose. Each day of his undercover journey was revealing deeper layers of the toxic culture that had spread through his company, but he wasn't finished yet. There were still voices he hadn't heard, stories that hadn't been told. He knew that if he wanted to fix this, he needed to fully understand the scope of the problem. As he settled in at the front desk, Marcus noticed that the office seemed quieter than usual. The employees moved through the lobby with tired expressions, their shoulders slumped and their conversations hushed. It was as if the weight of the company's dysfunction had drained them of their energy. Even Doris, who usually maintained a calm composure, seemed more withdrawn. Mid-morning, Marcus got a call from Tom, the head of HR, asking for a document to be sent to his office. As Marcus prepared to deliver it, he saw an opportunity to observe Tom more closely. After all, Tom was supposed to be the person employees turned to when they had concerns, yet Marcus had already heard complaints about his indifference toward employee welfare. It was time to see if those complaints were justified. When Marcus arrived at Tom's office, he knocked lightly on the door before stepping inside. Tom was sitting at his desk, staring at his computer, barely looking up as Marcus entered. His office was large and pristine, the kind of space that screamed authority and control. "Just leave it on the desk. I'll get to it later." Marcus nodded, placing the document on the edge of the desk. He lingered for a moment, hoping to observe more of Tom's behavior. After a few seconds of silence, Tom finally glanced up, his expression one of mild annoyance. "Is there something else?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a small risk. He wanted to see how Tom would react to a conversation about the company's culture. Something that, as head of HR, Tom should have been deeply concerned about. "I've been hearing a lot of talk about the workload lately. Seems like a lot of people are feeling pretty burned out." Tom leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, I've heard some complaints, but that's just how it is. This is a fast-paced company, and if people can't handle the pressure, maybe they're not cut out for it." Marcus felt a flicker of anger at Tom's dismissive tone. He had expected some defensiveness, but this was worse than he imagined. Tom wasn't just indifferent, he was actively disregarding the well-being of his employees. "But isn't it your job to help employees with those kinds of concerns, to make sure they're not overwhelmed?" Tom scoffed, shaking his head. "Look, we can't coddle people. It's business. Everyone wants things to be easy, but that's not how the real world works. They have a job to do, and if they can't keep up, there's always someone else who can." The words hit Marcus like a slap. This was the person responsible for ensuring a healthy work environment. And yet here he was, openly admitting that he saw his employees as replaceable cogs in a machine. The more Tom talked, the more Marcus realized just how deep the rot went. Tom didn't care about his employees. He cared about maintaining control, about keeping the company running smoothly at any cost, even if that cost was the well-being of the people who worked there. Marcus had suspected as much from the beginning, but hearing it directly from Tom's mouth confirmed his worst fears. After a brief, uncomfortable silence, Marcus nodded and turned to leave. As he walked back to the front desk, his mind raced. Tom was one of the key figures in the company, someone Marcus had trusted to take care of the employees. But it was clear now that Tom's priorities were completely misaligned with the values Marcus had tried to instill in the company. Back at the front desk, Marcus sat down and took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't let Tom's behavior go unchecked, but there was still more to uncover. He needed to see how other senior managers operated, especially those who interacted with employees more frequently. In the early afternoon, Marcus's opportunity came when Amanda, the project director he had overheard on his first day, walked through the lobby. She was deep in conversation with another manager, and Marcus could hear snippets of their discussion. "I don't know why they're complaining. If they can't handle the workload, maybe they're not management material." Marcus watched as she made her way towards the meeting room. It was the same dismissive attitude he had heard from Tom, an attitude that prioritized targets and output over people. Amanda, like Tom, had no empathy for the employees beneath her. She saw them as tools to be used until they were worn out and replaced. Later that day, Marcus finally saw Linda again. She was sitting in a meeting with a group of mid-level managers, her voice carrying through the glass walls of the conference room. Marcus couldn't make out everything she said, but from what he could hear, it was clear that Linda's abrasive behavior wasn't limited to her interaction with him the other day. As the meeting ended, one of the mid-level managers, David, walked out looking visibly shaken. His shoulders were slumped, and he had a dazed expression on his face, as if he had just been through an emotional battle. Marcus watched as David made his way over to the break room, clearly in need of a moment to collect himself. Intrigued, Marcus decided to approach him. "Hey, you doing okay? You look like you've had a rough day." David glanced up, startled, but after a moment he sighed heavily. "Yeah, it's just Linda. She's always like this, constantly putting people down, making us feel like we're not good enough. I've been here for 5 years, and it hasn't gotten any easier. She's ruthless." Marcus frowned, listening carefully. "Have you ever talked to HR about it? Filed a complaint?" David laughed bitterly. "HR? They don't care. We've all tried, but nothing ever changes. Linda's too valuable to them. She hits her targets, so they let her do whatever she wants. It doesn't matter who she tears down in the process." Hearing this only confirmed what Marcus had already suspected. Linda, Tom, Amanda, they were all part of a system that rewarded results at the expense of people. And the more he learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a matter of a few bad managers. It was a systemic problem, one that had been allowed to grow unchecked for far too long. As the day came to an end, Marcus felt the full weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He had seen enough to know that the company's culture had gone off the rails, but what troubled him most was how deeply entrenched the problems were. It wasn't just a matter of replacing a few toxic leaders. He needed to rebuild the entire structure of how the company valued its people. Tomorrow, Marcus would begin to formulate a plan. The time to reveal his true identity was approaching. But before he did, he needed to confront the hard truths about his own leadership. How had he let things get this bad? And more importantly, how could he make things right? Marcus spent the night reflecting on everything he had witnessed so far. The toxic behavior, the favoritism, the neglect of employees' well-being, it all weighed heavily on his mind. He knew that the time was fast approaching when he would have to reveal his true identity and confront the senior management team. But before he did that, he needed a plan, a way to address the systemic problems that had allowed people like Linda, Tom, and Amanda to thrive while hardworking employees like Angela, Henry, and David were left struggling. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office early. He wanted to take some time before the day started to observe the office when it was quiet, to see how people behaved when they weren't rushing between meetings or putting out fires. As he sat at the reception desk, sipping his coffee, he reflected on the culture he had tried to create at Tech Vision. In the beginning, Tech Vision had been his dream, a company where everyone felt valued, where hard work and dedication were recognized and rewarded, regardless of background or a position. But somewhere along the way, that vision had gotten lost. The company had grown, and with that growth had come new challenges. More employees, more targets, more pressure to perform. And in the midst of all that, Marcus had taken his eye off the ball. He had trusted the wrong people, allowed toxic behavior to go unchecked, and now the company he had worked so hard to build was at risk of becoming everything he had once fought against. As the office began to fill with employees, Marcus noticed how quickly the familiar dynamics resumed. The senior managers moved through the space with confidence, barely acknowledging the lower-level staff. The reception area buzzed with activity, but there was an underlying tension in the air, a sense that everyone was just trying to get through the day without drawing too much attention to themselves. Around mid-morning, Marcus had another run-in with Linda. She stormed through the lobby, barking orders at a junior employee who was struggling to keep up with her demands. Linda didn't even bother to stop and explain what she wanted. She simply expected the employee to understand and execute her instructions perfectly. When the employee hesitated, clearly confused, Linda rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath before walking away in frustration. Marcus clenched his fists under the desk. This was the behavior he had come to expect from Linda, dismissive, arrogant, and completely indifferent to the people around her. It was clear that she had been allowed to act this way for so long because no one had ever challenged her. She hit her targets, and that was all that mattered to the higher-ups. A little while later, Marcus overheard a conversation between Tom and Amanda in the hallway. They were discussing the upcoming quarterly review and how they planned to present their results to the board. Tom mentioned that there had been some complaints about the workload in the customer service department, but he brushed it off as typical whining from employees who couldn't handle the pressure. Amanda agreed, saying that if people couldn't keep up, they didn't belong in the company. Marcus felt a surge of anger. This was the exact mindset that had led to the burnout and dissatisfaction he had heard about from employees like Samantha. The senior managers saw their employees as expendable, replaceable parts, rather than the backbone of the company. He knew he couldn't wait much longer. The toxic culture had to be addressed, and the people responsible for perpetuating it needed to be held accountable. But before he confronted his team, Marcus wanted to talk to a few more employees, those who had been overlooked, undervalued, and ignored. That afternoon, Marcus found a quiet moment to talk to David, the mid-level manager who had been shaken by Linda's behavior the day before. They sat together in the break room, away from the prying eyes of the senior managers. David said, "HR? They don't care. We've all tried, but nothing ever changes. Linda's too valuable to them. She hits her targets, so they let her do whatever she wants. It doesn't matter who she tears down in the process." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of David's words. He had heard similar complaints from other employees, but hearing it from someone who had been with the company for years made it even more painful. Linda wasn't just a problem. She was a symptom of a much larger issue. The company had prioritized results over people for too long, and now it was coming back to haunt them. As the day came to a close, Marcus felt a sense of clarity. He had seen enough. The problems were clear, and so was the path forward. Tomorrow, he would confront the senior management team. It was time to reveal his true identity, hold them accountable for their actions, and begin the process of rebuilding the company's culture from the ground up. But even as he prepared for the confrontation, Marcus knew that this wasn't just about removing toxic individuals from positions of power. It was about creating a new system, one that valued people over profits, that rewarded empathy and integrity, and that gave every employee, from the receptionist to the project director, the respect and recognition they deserved. Tomorrow would be a turning point, not just for Marcus, but for the entire company. Marcus woke up the next morning with a sense of resolve. Today was the day. He had seen enough during his time undercover to know that serious changes were needed, and the time had come to confront the senior management team and reveal his true identity. He could no longer allow the toxic culture to continue unchecked. Today, Tech Vision would begin the process of rebuilding, and it would start with accountability. As Marcus drove to the office, his mind raced with thoughts of how the confrontation might go. He knew that some of the managers, like Linda and Tom, would likely try to defend their actions or deflect blame. But he was prepared for that. He had witnessed their behavior firsthand, and there was no room for excuses. When he arrived at the office, Marcus took a deep breath before stepping inside. He still had a few hours before the scheduled management meeting, but he wanted to gather his thoughts and prepare himself mentally for what was to come. Sitting at the front desk, Marcus observed the office with new eyes. He had spent the past week seeing the company through the lens of Mike, the receptionist. But today, he felt the weight of his role as CEO more than ever. The responsibility of fixing what had gone wrong within his company rested squarely on his shoulders, and he wasn't going to shy away from it. As the day progressed, Marcus quietly watched the interactions around him, just as he had done every day since going undercover. He noticed Linda, as usual, storming through the office with her air of superiority, barking orders and showing no regard for the employees she passed. Tom made his rounds, chatting with other senior managers, his tone casual and dismissive whenever the topic of employee complaints came up. And Amanda, true to form, walked through the office with her head held high, projecting an image of authority while showing little concern for the struggles of those beneath her. It was time for all of that to change. As the clock inched closer to the meeting time, Marcus stood up from the front desk and headed toward the conference room. His heart was pounding, but his resolve was firm. This was the moment he had been preparing for, and he knew that the future of Tech Vision depended on what happened next. When Marcus entered the conference room, the senior management team was already seated around the large table, casually chatting and preparing for the quarterly review. Linda, Tom, Amanda, and a few other department heads were there, each of them appearing confident and unaware of what was about to unfold. Marcus took a seat at the head of the table, still in his Mike disguise. He glanced around the room, noting the relaxed body language and the air of confidence among the managers. None of them had any idea what was coming. After a few minutes, Tom stood up to start the meeting. Tom said, "All right, everyone, let's get started. We've got a lot to cover in today's review, so let's dive right in. First up, let's talk about the latest performance metrics." Before he could continue, Marcus raised his hand, signaling for him to stop. Tom looked confused but sat back down, waiting for Marcus to speak. Marcus cleared his throat and addressed the room. "I'm Marcus Johnson, CEO of Tech Vision," Marcus said, pulling off his glasses and name tag. The room fell into stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. The managers stared at Marcus, trying to process what they had just heard. Linda's face went pale, her usual arrogance replaced by shock. Tom's expression quickly turned to disbelief, while Amanda's eyes widened in alarm. "I've been undercover as a receptionist for the past week, observing how you manage this company. And what I've seen has been deeply troubling," Marcus continued. "The way you treat employees, the toxic culture you've allowed to thrive, the disregard for people's well-being, it all ends today." Linda crossed her arms, looking at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. This is some kind of joke, right?" Marcus turned his gaze to Linda. "It's not a joke, Linda. I've seen how you belittle and bully employees, and that behavior is unacceptable. You've been allowed to act this way for too long because you hit your targets. But no amount of targets hit can justify the damage you've done to the people in this company. You will be held accountable for your actions." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat and tried to speak up. "Marcus, this is all just a misunderstanding. I've been doing my best to manage HR." "Your best?" Marcus interrupted. "You've ignored employee complaints, dismissed concerns about workload, and contributed to the toxic environment in this company. As head of HR, your job was to protect the employees, to ensure their well-being. Instead, you've allowed people like Linda to thrive, while hardworking employees like Angela and Henry are left struggling. You failed in your responsibility, Tom." Amanda sat quietly, clearly shaken by the turn of events. Marcus turned his attention to her. "Amanda, you're not off the hook either. I've heard how you talk about employees behind their backs, how you dismiss their struggles as not your problem. That ends now. You need to start valuing the people who make this company run, or you won't have a place here anymore." As Marcus finished speaking, the room remained silent. The managers, who had walked into the meeting with confidence and control, now sat frozen in shock, their authority crumbling before them. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that the hardest part was yet to come. He needed to rebuild the company from the ground up, to create a culture that valued people over profits. But for now, the first step had been taken. The toxic leaders had been exposed, and the path to change had been set in motion. With the confrontation behind him, Marcus wasted no time moving forward. The stunned silence of the senior management team still echoed in his mind, but there was no room for hesitation now. He needed to begin implementing the changes necessary to rebuild Tech Vision from the ground up. The first step was an immediate restructuring of leadership. Marcus knew that some of the senior managers, like Linda and Tom, had to go. They had poisoned the company's culture for too long, and keeping them into their roles would only hinder progress. That afternoon, Marcus called an emergency board meeting to lay out his plan. As the board gathered in the conference room, Marcus felt the weight of their eyes on him. They had been briefed on what had happened earlier with the senior managers, and there was a mix of concern and curiosity in their expressions. Marcus didn't waste time. He stood at the head of the table and got straight to the point. "We need to make immediate changes to leadership," Marcus said. "Linda and Tom will be removed from their positions. They have contributed to a toxic culture that we can no longer tolerate. Their leadership has hurt our employees, and that's something we need to correct immediately." One of the board members, Susan, spoke up. "What about Amanda? Is she also being removed?" Marcus shook his head. "Amanda will be given a second chance, but she'll be on probation. I've seen enough from her to know that she has the potential to change, but she needs to prove that she's willing to put the well-being of the employees first. If she can't do that, then she'll be let go as well." Another board member, Jack, leaned forward. "What's the plan for moving forward? How are we going to address the issues with employee satisfaction?" Marcus had anticipated this question. "We're going to implement a new employee feedback system. From now on, every employee will have the opportunity to provide anonymous feedback about their managers and the overall work environment. We'll use that feedback to make decisions about promotions, leadership roles, and workplace improvements." He could see the board members nodding in agreement. The idea of an anonymous feedback system wasn't new, but it was something that had been lacking at Tech Vision. The previous management had been more concerned with hitting targets than listening to employees, and that needed to change. "We're also going to introduce regular check-ins with employees," Marcus continued. "HR will be required to conduct one-on-one meetings with every employee at least once a quarter to discuss their workload, concerns, and any issues they're facing. It's time we start treating people as more than just numbers." The room was silent as the board members processed the changes Marcus was laying out. Finally, Susan spoke again. "This is going to take a lot of work, Marcus. Are you sure we can turn things around?" Marcus looked at her with a determined expression. "We have to. This company was built on a vision of inclusion and respect, and we've strayed too far from that. It's time to get back on track, no matter how much work it takes." With the board's support, Marcus left the meeting feeling a sense of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a while, he felt like Tech Vision had a real chance at change. The next day, Marcus began the process of transitioning leadership. Linda and Tom were removed from their positions, and Marcus personally met with their teams to explain what had happened and to reassure them that changes were being made for the better. In a meeting with Angela, the senior accountant who had been passed over for promotions multiple times, Marcus was direct. "Angela, I've seen how hard you work, and I know you've been overlooked for too long. That's going to change. I want to offer you a promotion to lead the accounting team," Marcus said. Angela looked shocked. "I don't know what to say. I've been waiting for this opportunity for so long, but I didn't think it would ever come." "You deserve it," Marcus replied, "and I want you to know that this is just the beginning. We're going to start recognizing the contributions of people who've been overlooked for too long." Angela nodded, gratitude evident in her expression. "Thank you. I've always believed in this company, and I'm ready to help make it better." After the meeting, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction. He knew that promoting Angela was the right move. She had proven herself time and time again, and she deserved the recognition that had been denied to her for so long. Later that day, Marcus had a similar conversation with Henry, the IT worker who had quietly supported his colleagues and gone above and beyond his role. "Henry, I want to offer you a leadership position in the IT department," Marcus said. "You've been an invaluable asset to this company, and it's time you were recognized for your contributions." Henry looked stunned. I don't even know what to say. I've never expected something like this." Marcus smiled. "You've earned it. Your work, your attitude, and the way you treat others. It's exactly what we need more of in this company." Henry nodded, still trying to process the offer. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll do everything I can to live up to this." As the day came to a close, Marcus reflected on the progress that had already been made. There was still much to do, but he knew that these changes were a step in the right direction. Promoting people like Angela and Henry wasn't just about rewarding hard work. It was about shifting the culture of the company. It was about showing everyone that people mattered more than profits. And that real leadership came from empathy and integrity, not just hitting targets. The next phase would be even more challenging, but Marcus was ready. As the days passed, Marcus focused on laying the groundwork for the cultural transformation that Tech Vision so desperately needed. Removing toxic leadership was only the first step. Now the real challenge was to rebuild trust among the employees and create an environment where they felt valued, respected, and heard. One of Marcus's top priorities was implementing the new anonymous employee feedback system he had proposed during the board meeting. He knew that employees needed a safe space to express their concerns and provide honest feedback without fear of retaliation. Marcus gathered the HR team, making it clear that this new system was not just a formality. It was the foundation for everything moving forward. During the meeting, Marcus laid out the plan. From now on, every employee will have the chance to give anonymous feedback about their managers, their workload, and any issues they face. This feedback will be taken seriously and used to evaluate managers and make necessary improvements. One of the HR team members, Sarah, nodded in agreement. "This could really help us identify problems early on before they get out of hand." "Exactly," Marcus replied. "It's time to be proactive, not reactive. We need to know how our employees are doing and how we can support them better. This system will give them a voice." As the HR team began working on the implementation of the feedback system, Marcus turned his attention to another important issue: transparency. For too long, employees had felt like they were kept in the dark about decisions that affected their work. Marcus knew that fostering a culture of open communication was essential if he wanted to rebuild trust. He scheduled an all-company meeting, inviting every employee from the top executives to the newest hires. When the day of the meeting arrived, the room was filled with nervous energy. Employees were unsure of what to expect after the shakeup in leadership, and many were curious about the changes Marcus had promised. Marcus stood at the front of the room, ready to address the group. He began by acknowledging the difficulties of the past. "I know that the last few years have been tough," Marcus said. "Many of you have felt unheard, overlooked, and undervalued. That's on me. As the CEO of this company, it's my responsibility to make sure that every single person here feels like they matter." And somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. The room was silent as Marcus continued. "I went undercover because I wanted to see for myself what was really happening in this company. And what I saw wasn't easy to accept. There's been a culture of favoritism, toxic leadership, and a lack of respect for the people who make this company what it is. But that ends now." He could see employees nodding, some of them exchanging glances. For many, this was the first time they had heard a leader speak so openly about the problems within the company. "We're making changes, real changes," Marcus said. "We've removed the leaders who contributed to the toxic environment, and we're promoting those who have proven their dedication to this company and its values. We've also introduced an anonymous feedback system, so every one of you has a direct line to share your concerns and suggestions. Your voices will be heard." After a pause, Marcus added, "But this isn't just about what I'm doing. It's about all of us. We're going to rebuild this company together, and that means every person here has a role to play. If you see something wrong, speak up. If you have an idea for improvement, share it. We're in this together." The employees in the room began to clap, and Marcus could feel the shift in the atmosphere. There was a sense of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things could change. After the meeting, Marcus made a point of speaking to several employees individually. He approached Samantha, the customer service representative, who had shared her frustration with the overwhelming workload. "How are you feeling after the meeting?" Marcus asked. Samantha smiled, though her expression was cautious. "Honestly, I'm hopeful. It feels like things might actually change this time, but we've heard promises before. So I guess I'm waiting to see what happens." Marcus nodded, understanding her skepticism. "I get it, and I know it's going to take time to rebuild trust, but I want you to know that the changes we're making are real. The customer service department will be getting additional support, and we'll be reviewing the workload to make sure no one is overwhelmed. You won't be left to struggle on your own anymore." Samantha's smile widened, and she seemed genuinely relieved. "That's good to hear. Thank you for taking this seriously." Next, Marcus sought out Javier, the custodial staff member, who had quietly expressed his disappointment in the way things had changed over the years. Javier had been with the company for a long time, and Marcus knew that his perspective was valuable. "Javier, I want to make sure you know that you and your team are as important to this company as anyone else," Marcus said. "You've been here longer than most, and you've seen this place at its best and its worst. If there's anything you need or any ideas you have to make things better, my door is always open." Javier looked surprised, but he nodded. "Thank you, Marcus. I've always tried to do my job the best I can, but it's nice to know that it's being recognized." "It is," Marcus replied, "and we're going to make sure that every person in this company feels that way." As Marcus walked through the office after the meeting, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks along the way, but the foundation for change had been laid. He could see the shift in his employees' attitudes. There was less fear, more openness, and a growing sense that they were all in this together. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued to make himself available to employees at all levels, regularly checking in and listening to their feedback. The anonymous system began generating important insights, and he worked closely with the HR team to address the issues that came up. One afternoon, Marcus received an anonymous note through the feedback system that caught his attention. It was from a lower-level employee who thanked him for making these changes, but expressed concern that some managers were still resistant to the new culture. Marcus knew that this was just the beginning of the transformation. He would need to continue being vigilant, ensuring that the changes he was making weren't just surface level, but were ingrained in the very fabric of the company. But he was ready for that challenge. Tech Vision was on the path to becoming a place where every employee felt valued, and Marcus was determined to see that vision through. As the weeks passed, Marcus continued to focus on rebuilding Tech Vision's culture from the ground up. The employee feedback system was already proving to be a valuable tool, offering insights into areas that needed improvement and giving employees the platform to voice their concerns. But as Marcus expected, the transformation wasn't going to be easy. One of the biggest challenges was ensuring that the changes he was implementing weren't just temporary fixes. Some of the remaining managers were still resistant to the shift in culture, clinging to the old ways of doing things. They weren't as overt in their resistance as Linda or Tom had been, but Marcus could sense their reluctance. One afternoon, Marcus received a message from Rachel, a junior manager who had recently taken over some of Linda's responsibilities. Rachel had always been a diligent and respectful employee, and Marcus trusted her judgment. In her message, she expressed concerns about some of the senior managers who were still undermining the changes. Rachel said, "I've noticed that a few of the managers are going through the motions, but they're not fully embracing the new culture. They act like they're on board in meetings, but when it comes to interacting with their teams, nothing's really changed. I think they're hoping this will all blow over." Marcus sighed as he read the message. He had anticipated this kind of pushback, but it was still frustrating to see it happening. If the culture at Tech Vision was going to improve, everyone needed to be fully committed. He called Rachel into his office later that day to discuss the situation. "Thanks for bringing this to my attention," Marcus said. I had a feeling there would be some resistance, but it's disappointing to hear that some of the managers aren't taking this seriously. Rachel nodded. I think they're just hoping things will go back to the way they were before. They don't see how important these changes are. We're not going back, Marcus said firmly. The old culture is gone, and they need to understand that. If they can't get on board, we'll have to make some hard decisions about who stays and who goes. Rachel seemed relieved to hear Marcus's resolve. I'm glad to hear that. I've seen how much this new direction is helping the employees, and I think with more time, we can really make a difference. After the meeting with Rachel, Marcus called an impromptu meeting with the senior management team to address the lingering resistance. He didn't mince words. I've heard that some of you are still clinging to the old ways of doing things, hoping that this cultural shift will be temporary, Marcus said. Let me make one thing clear. We are not going back. The changes we've made are permanent, and the only way forward is to embrace them fully. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each manager, ensuring his message was understood. If you can't get on board with this new direction, then you'll need to find another place to work, Marcus continued. I need leaders who will help me build a culture of respect, inclusion, and support, not leaders who will drag us back to the toxic environment we had before. One of the managers, Steve, a longtime employee who had worked under Linda, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus noticed and decided to address him directly. Steve, I know you've been here a long time and I value your experience, Marcus said, but I need to know that you're fully committed to making these changes. If you're not, then we need to have an honest conversation about your future here. Steve looked down for a moment, then nodded. I understand, Marcus. I admit it's been hard to adjust to the new way of doing things, but I'm willing to make it work. I don't want to leave this company. I've been here too long for that. Good, Marcus replied, but I need more than words. I need to see action. That goes for all of you. This isn't just about what you say in meetings. It's about how you lead your teams every day. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of clarity. Marcus had made it clear that there would be no room for half-hearted efforts. If the managers wanted to stay at Tech Vision, they needed to fully embrace the new culture. As Marcus left the meeting, he felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The resistance he had encountered was frustrating, but it had also given him an opportunity to reaffirm his commitment to change. He wasn't going to let a few holdouts derail the progress the company had made. Over the next few days, Marcus made a point of observing the senior managers more closely. He checked in with their teams, asking employees how things were going and whether they felt supported. To his relief, he began to see improvements. Some of the managers who had initially resisted the changes were now making an effort to adapt, while others were still struggling but were at least trying. One afternoon, Marcus ran into Henry in the break room. Henry had recently been promoted to a leadership role in the IT department, and Marcus wanted to see how things were going. How's the new role treating you? Marcus asked, grabbing a cup of coffee. Henry smiled, though he looked a bit tired. It's been great, honestly. A lot of responsibility, but I'm happy to have the chance to lead. The team's been really supportive, and we're making some good progress. Oh, I see. That's good to hear, Marcus said. You've earned it, and I know it's a lot of work, but I have no doubt you're the right person for the job. Henry nodded. I appreciate that. I've been trying to keep the culture shift in mind too, making sure the team feels heard, you know? I don't want to make the same mistakes some of the other managers did. Marcus felt a sense of pride hearing Henry's words. He was exactly the kind of leader the company needed, someone who not only excelled at his job, but also cared about the well-being of his team. You're doing great, Henry, Marcus said. And if you ever need anything, support, advice, whatever, my door is always open. Thanks, Marcus. I'll keep that in mind, Henry replied. As Marcus left the break room, he couldn't help but feel optimistic. The culture at Tech Vision was beginning to shift, slowly but surely. The changes were taking root, and the employees who truly cared about the company were stepping up to lead by example. But Marcus knew the work was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, and it would take constant effort to ensure that the new culture became fully ingrained. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt confident that Tech Vision was on the right path. As Marcus continued pushing for a deeper cultural shift within Tech Vision, he knew that the hardest part was ensuring that the changes would stick. Over the weeks, some of the more resistant managers had begun to come around, but there were still a few who struggled to adapt to the new reality. Marcus had made it clear that there was no room for anyone to undermine the company's new direction, but he knew that old habits died hard. One of those managers was Steve, the longtime employee who had worked closely with Linda. Despite his assurances in the meeting that he would make an effort to change, Marcus had received feedback from Steve's team that suggested otherwise. The anonymous feedback system revealed that Steve was still holding on to some of his old behaviors, micromanaging his team, dismissing their ideas, and resisting the new transparency initiatives Marcus had put in place. Marcus knew it was time to have a direct conversation with Steve. He scheduled a one-on-one meeting with him in his office, determined to get to the bottom of the issue. When Steve walked into the office, he looked uneasy, clearly aware that this conversation was going to be a difficult one. "Steve, I've been reviewing some of the feedback from your team," Marcus began, "and I'm concerned. You said you were committed to embracing the new culture, but it seems like there are still some issues we need to address." Steve sighed and sat down. "Look, Marcus, I've been trying, but it's not easy. I've been doing things a certain way for years, and this whole shift has been hard to adjust to." "I understand that change can be difficult," Marcus replied, "but we've talked about this before. We can't go back to the old ways. Your team needs to feel supported, not micromanaged. They need to know that their ideas matter and that their voices are heard. And if you can't make that shift, we're going to have a problem." Steve nodded, looking down at his hands. "I get it. I guess I didn't realize how much I'd gotten used to the old way of doing things. It's hard to let go of that." Marcus leaned forward, softening his tone. "I get that, but this is an opportunity to grow, Steve. You're a valuable part of this company, and I want to see you succeed, but it's going to take effort. You need to start trusting your team more, giving them the space to do their jobs without feeling like you're watching their every move." Steve nodded again, looking thoughtful. "I hear you, Marcus. I'll work on it. I don't want to be the one holding us back." "Good," Marcus said. "I'm glad to hear that, and I'm here to support you. If you need help figuring out how to navigate this change, don't hesitate to reach out." After Steve left, Marcus felt hopeful. He knew it wouldn't be an overnight transformation, but he believed that with the right guidance, even those who were most resistant to change could adapt. Steve had been part of the company for a long time, and Marcus didn't want to lose him. But the message was clear. The old way of doing things was gone for good. In the following days, Marcus continued to observe how the managers were handling the new expectations. He received more positive feedback from employees about the shift in culture. People were beginning to feel more comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas, and reporting issues without fear of retaliation. The anonymous feedback system had become a powerful tool, not just for identifying problems, but for fostering a sense of trust between employees and management. One afternoon, Marcus decided to check in with Angela, the senior accountant who had recently been promoted. He found her in the finance department, busy working on the quarterly report. "Angela, how's everything going?" Marcus asked, pulling up a chair next to her desk. Angela smiled. "It's been going well, actually. The team's been great, and the transition into the leadership role has been smoother than I expected. I think the changes you've made have really helped people feel more connected." "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus said. "You've been doing great work, and I've been hearing nothing but positive feedback about your leadership." Angela nodded. "I've been trying to take the feedback system to heart, listening to my team, making sure they feel supported. It's made a big difference." Marcus could see the confidence in Angela's posture, the way she spoke with a sense of pride in her work. It was exactly what he had hoped for when he promoted her. "I'm proud of you, Angela," Marcus said. "You've stepped up, and you've earned this. Keep leading by example." "Thank you, Marcus," Angela replied. "I'm committed to making sure the changes you've started become part of the company's DNA." As Marcus left the finance department, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Promoting Angela had been one of his best decisions, and she was proving every day that she was the kind of leader TechVision needed. However, Marcus knew that not every part of the transition had been smooth. There were still challenges ahead. One of the ongoing concerns was ensuring that the workload was being evenly distributed, especially in departments that had previously been overwhelmed, like customer service. He scheduled a meeting with Samantha, the customer service representative he had spoken to during his time undercover. Marcus wanted to check in with her and make sure that the changes were having a positive impact on her department. When Samantha arrived at his office, she seemed more relaxed than the last time they had spoken, but Marcus could tell there was still some lingering stress. "How's everything going in customer service?" Marcus asked. "It's better," Samantha said, taking a seat. "We've got more support now, and the workload isn't as overwhelming as it used to be, but there are still some days where it feels like we're just barely keeping our heads above water." Marcus nodded, understanding the pressure the department had been under for so long. "I appreciate your honesty, Samantha. We're working on bringing in more resources to help balance things out, but if there's anything specific you think we could do to make things easier, I'm all ears." Samantha hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Honestly, I think part of it is just communication. Sometimes it feels like we're getting hit with changes without enough notice. If we had a bit more time to prepare for new processes or systems, I think we'd be able to handle it better. Marcus made a mental note of her suggestion. That's great feedback. I'll make sure we work on improving communication, especially when it comes to rolling out changes. I don't want your team to feel like you're constantly scrambling. Samantha smiled, clearly relieved that her concerns were being taken seriously. Thanks, Marcus. I really appreciate that. As the meeting ended, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every conversation he had with employees reinforced the importance of the work he was doing. The culture was changing, but there was still much to be done. The next phase of TechVision's transformation was all about sustainability. Marcus knew that while the initial steps to rebuild the company's culture had been promising, true change required ongoing effort. It wasn't enough to just remove toxic leaders and promote those who had been overlooked. The systems, structures, and daily habits that had once allowed the toxic environment to flourish had to be completely rethought. One of the key areas Marcus wanted to focus on was employee development and growth. Over the years, many employees had expressed frustration at the lack of clear pathways for career advancement. Too often, promotions seemed tied to favoritism and politics rather than merit and dedication. That had to change. He called a meeting with the HR team to discuss a new initiative that would ensure every employee had a clear roadmap for growth. Marcus addressed the group saying, "We need to provide our employees with real opportunities for advancement. That means offering mentorship programs, training, and a clear set of criteria for promotions. No more guessing games, no more favoritism." One of the HR managers, Leah, nodded. "That's a great idea, Marcus. A lot of employees have been asking for more transparency in how promotions work. If we can create a system where everyone knows what's expected of them and how they can grow within the company, I think it would go a long way in building trust." "Exactly," Marcus said. "I want every employee to feel like they have a future here. Whether they're in entry-level positions or management, there needs to be a clear path forward." The HR team began working on developing a new career development program that included mentorship opportunities, regular performance reviews, and individualized growth plans. Marcus made it clear that the focus would be on fostering talent at all levels, not just for those already in leadership positions. He wanted to ensure that employees like Angela and Henry, who had proven themselves over time, weren't the exceptions. They needed to be the rule. As the program began to take shape, Marcus knew there was another area that still needed attention: diversity and inclusion. While TechVision had always prided itself on being a diverse company, Marcus realized that diversity alone wasn't enough. Employees needed to feel like they belonged, like their unique perspectives and backgrounds were valued. To address this, Marcus decided to launch a company-wide initiative focused on inclusion. He called a meeting with the diversity and inclusion team to discuss his vision. "We've done a good job of building a diverse workforce, but now it's time to take the next step," Marcus said. "It's not just about having different backgrounds represented at the company. It's about making sure everyone feels included, that their voices are heard, and that they have a seat at the table." The head of the diversity team, Grace, agreed. "I think that's exactly what we need, Marcus. We've already started some inclusion training, but it would be great to formalize it and make sure it's a key part of our culture going forward." Marcus nodded. "I want to make inclusion a priority in every department. We need to ensure that managers are trained to be inclusive leaders and that they're fostering environments where everyone feels comfortable speaking up and contributing." Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked closely with Grace and her team to roll out the new inclusion initiative. It included a series of workshops and training sessions for managers, as well as ongoing support for employees who wanted to share their experiences and ideas. The goal was to create a workplace where every individual, regardless of their background, felt like they were part of the TechVision family. One afternoon, Marcus decided to check in with Javier, the custodial staff member he had spoken to earlier in his Undercover experience. Javier had been with the company for years, and Marcus wanted to see how things were going for him now that the new culture was starting to take hold. Marcus found Javier in the lobby, polishing the floors. He approached him with a smile. "Javier, how's everything going?" Marcus asked. Javier looked up, surprised but pleased to see Marcus. "Things have been good, Marcus. The changes you've made are starting to make a difference. People seem more relaxed, I guess. It's like there's less tension in the air." "That's great to hear," Marcus said. "I've been keeping an eye on things, but it's always good to get feedback from people like you who've been here a long time." Javier nodded. "Yeah, I've noticed that managers are starting to treat people with more respect. It used to feel like we were invisible, but now they actually acknowledge us, ask how we're doing, It's a small thing, but it makes a big difference. Marcus was glad to hear it. That's what we're aiming for. Everyone deserves to feel valued, no matter what their role is. Javier smiled. I appreciate that, Marcus. It's a nice change. As Marcus walked away, he felt a sense of pride in how far the company had come. But he also knew there was still work to do. The feedback system had shown that while most employees were starting to feel the positive effects of the cultural shift, there were still pockets of resistance. Some managers were slow to adapt, and Marcus knew he couldn't afford to let that resistance fester. A few days later, Marcus received another anonymous note through the feedback system. It was from an employee in one of the smaller departments, expressing concern that their manager wasn't fully embracing the new culture. The note said, "Our manager is still stuck in the old ways. They're resistant to the changes and are making it hard for us to feel like we're part of the team. It feels like we're being left behind while the rest of the company is moving forward." Marcus knew that addressing this kind of issue quickly was critical. He couldn't afford to let any department fall behind in the cultural shift. He scheduled a meeting with the department's manager, determined to address the problem head-on. When the manager, Kelly, arrived for the meeting, Marcus got straight to the point. "I've been hearing some feedback from your team, Kelly," Marcus said. "They're concerned that you are not fully embracing the new direction we're taking as a company." Kelly looked uncomfortable, but didn't try to deny it. "I guess I've been struggling with some of the changes. It's just a lot all at once, and I'm not sure how to implement everything the way it's supposed to be done." "I understand that change can be difficult," Marcus said. "But this is where we're headed as a company. The old way of doing things is over. We're creating a culture that values respect, inclusion, and employee growth. And I need you to be fully on board with that." Kelly nodded. "I want to be. I'm not sure how to make the shift. I've been managing my team the same way for years, and it's hard to adjust." "I appreciate your honesty," Marcus said, "and I'm here to help. We're offering additional support and training for managers who need it. But I need to see a commitment from you to make this work. Your team is looking to you for leadership, and you need to set the right example." Kelly took a deep breath and nodded again. "I'll do it, Marcus. I'll make the changes. I don't want to be the reason my team falls behind." "Good," Marcus said. "I'm confident you can do it, and I'm here to support you every step of the way." As Kelly left the meeting, Marcus felt a sense of relief. He knew that not everyone would adapt to the new culture at the same pace, but as long as they were willing to try, there was hope. With every passing week, Marcus could feel the culture at TechVision shifting. Employees were more engaged, more open about their experiences, and managers who had once been resistant were starting to come around. The feedback system had proven invaluable, helping Marcus and the leadership team stay ahead of potential issues before they could spiral into bigger problems. Still, Marcus knew that the real test of the company's transformation would come when they faced their first major challenge under the new culture. That challenge came sooner than expected. One morning, Marcus received an urgent email from the finance department. A significant client had raised concerns about a major project, and it was clear that a few missteps had been made along the way. The project had fallen behind schedule, and the client was unhappy with the lack of communication. There was a real risk that TechVision could lose the client, which would be a huge financial blow to the company. Marcus immediately called a meeting with the project team to figure out what had gone wrong. As he entered the conference room, the tension in the air was palpable. The team, led by Rachel, had been working hard on the project, but it was clear that something had slipped through the cracks. Rachel spoke first. "Marcus, we've been trying to get back on track, but we've hit some roadblocks. The project's scope kept changing, and we didn't anticipate some of the challenges. We've been in constant communication with the client, but I think they feel like we haven't been proactive enough." Marcus listened carefully, his expression serious but not accusatory. He knew that mistakes were bound to happen, but it was how they responded to those mistakes that would define the company's new culture. "What's the biggest challenge right now?" Marcus asked. Rachel sighed. "It's mainly about resources. We're stretched thin, and while we've been trying to keep up with the client's demands, I think we've overcommitted. We need more people on the project to get it back on track." "Why wasn't that brought up earlier?" Marcus asked, his tone calm but firm. Rachel looked down, clearly frustrated with herself. "I should have raised the flag earlier, but I was hoping we could manage it without asking for more resources. I didn't want to seem like we couldn't handle it." Marcus nodded. "I appreciate your honesty, but moving forward, I want to make it clear that we need to be upfront about these kinds of challenges, even if it's uncomfortable. This is exactly what our new culture is about: transparency and support. If we need more resources, we need to speak up early and get the help we need." I'd rather address these issues up front than deal with unhappy clients later. Rachel nodded. Understood. I'll make sure we're more proactive in the future. Good, Marcus said. Now, let's focus on fixing this. I want you to put together a plan for getting the project back on track, and we'll allocate the resources you need. We can still salvage this if we act quickly. As the meeting ended, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was the first real test of the company's new values. And while the situation wasn't ideal, it was an opportunity to show that Tech Vision had changed. Instead of blaming the team for the mistakes, Marcus had focused on finding solutions and offering support, exactly the kind of leadership he wanted to foster throughout the company. Later that day, Marcus gathered the senior leadership team to discuss the situation and ensure that everyone was on the same page. We've hit a snag with one of our major projects, Marcus said, addressing the group. But the way we respond to this is just as important as the project itself. We need to make sure that our teams feel supported and that they know they can ask for help when they need it. Sarah, one of the HR leaders, spoke up. I think this is a great opportunity to reinforce the importance of transparency. If employees know that they can speak up without fear of being judged, we'll be able to address issues much earlier. Exactly, Marcus said. And we need to make sure that this support is coming from the top down. Managers need to create an environment where their teams feel safe bringing up concerns, even when it's about a high-stakes project like this. Jack, one of the senior managers, nodded. I've been seeing that shift in my team already. People are more willing to speak up when they're struggling, and it's helped us avoid some potential problems. But we still have a long way to go. I'm glad to hear that, Marcus said. This isn't about perfection. It's about progress. As long as we're moving in the right direction and learning from our mistakes, we're on the right path. In the following days, Marcus worked closely with Rachel and her team to get the project back on track. They brought in additional resources, streamlined communication with the client, and adjusted the project timeline to ensure that it could be delivered without cutting corners. The client, while initially frustrated, was impressed with the way Tech Vision handled the situation. Instead of making excuses, the team had taken responsibility, communicated clearly, and found solutions. It was a clear demonstration of the company's new approach to leadership and accountability. After the project was back on track, Marcus called Rachel into his office to check in. How's the team holding up? Marcus asked. Rachel smiled, though she looked a bit tired. They're doing better. I think everyone feels a lot more confident now that we've got the right resources in place. And the client's been happy with the updates. That's great to hear, Marcus said. I know this was a tough situation, but I'm really proud of how you handled it. You took responsibility, you were honest about the challenges, and you found solutions. That's the kind of leadership we need here. Thanks, Marcus, Rachel replied. I was worried at first, but having your support made all the difference. It's good to know that we're not alone when things get tough. You're never alone, Marcus said. That's the whole point of this new direction we're taking. We're a team, and we support each other through the good and the bad. As Rachel left his office, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction. The company had faced a real test, and they had passed it with flying colors. But more than that, they had done it in a way that reinforced the values Marcus had been working so hard to instill: honesty, transparency, and support. The culture at Tech Vision was continuing to evolve, and Marcus knew that there would be more challenges ahead. But he was ready. The company was on the right path, and with every challenge they faced, they grew stronger. As Tech Vision continued its transformation, Marcus remained focused on ensuring that the company didn't just change on the surface, but that the new values became deeply embedded in its culture. The successful handling of the project crisis had shown him that the company was capable of adapting, but there was still more work to be done. One of Marcus's next priorities was to ensure that the employees who had been most affected by the old toxic culture knew that they weren't forgotten. He scheduled a series of meetings with different departments to get a sense of how people were feeling and whether the changes were making a meaningful impact. One morning, Marcus sat down with the customer service team, the department that had been hit hardest by the workload issues. He wanted to hear directly from the employees about their experience. So how's everything going? Marcus asked the group as they gathered in the meeting room. He kept the tone casual, wanting them to feel comfortable speaking openly. Samantha, the customer service representative, who had voiced her concerns earlier in Marcus's undercover mission, spoke first. Honestly, things have gotten a lot better. We've got more support now and the workload is more manageable. But I think the biggest change is that we feel like we can actually talk to our managers about what we need. Before, it felt like no one was listening. Several others nodded in agreement. Jake, another member of the team, chimed in. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. We've still got a lot of pressure, but it feels like there's more understanding now. Like if we're struggling, we can ask for help without feeling like we're letting the team down. Marcus was pleased to hear that the changes were making a difference, but he also knew that it was important to keep improving. I'm glad to hear things are better, he said, but I want you to know that we're not done yet. If there's anything else you think we can do to make things even smoother, I want to hear it. Emily, another member of the team, raised her hand. I think more cross-department communication would help. Sometimes we get overwhelmed because there's a lack of coordination between us and other teams. If we could be more aligned with other departments, it would make things a lot easier. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's a great point. I'll work with the other department heads to make sure there's more cross-team collaboration. We need to make sure everyone's working together. After the meeting, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The customer service team had been through a lot, and seeing them starting to feel more supported gave him confidence that the changes were having a lasting impact. He knew there was still work to be done, but the progress was undeniable. Later that week, Marcus met with the IT team, where Henry had been promoted to a leadership position. He wanted to check in and see how Henry was adjusting to his new role. "How's everything going, Henry?" Marcus asked as they sat down for a coffee in the break room. Henry smiled, though he looked a bit tired. "It's been good. Busy, but good. The team's been really supportive, and I think we're making some great progress on the projects we've been handling." Marcus nodded. "I've been hearing good things about the work you're doing. And how's the transition to leadership? I know it's a big step up." Henry chuckled. "Yeah, it's definitely a lot more responsibility. But I'm learning as I go, and I've been trying to lead the way you've talked about, by listening to the team and making sure they feel like they're part of the process. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need," Marcus said. "And if you ever feel like you need more support or guidance, don't hesitate to reach out. We're in this together." Henry nodded, looking relieved. "Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate that. I'll definitely let you know if I need anything." As Marcus reflected on his conversation with Henry, he felt proud of how far the company had come. Employees like Henry were stepping up and embracing the new culture, leading with empathy and integrity. It was the kind of leadership Marcus had always envisioned for TechVision. But Marcus knew there was one final piece of the puzzle that needed to be addressed: recognition and reward. Too many employees, especially those in lower-level positions, had gone unrecognized for their hard work. Marcus wanted to change that by creating a system where employees at all levels were rewarded for their contributions. He called a meeting with the HR team, the HR team, to discuss the idea. "We need to start recognizing the employees who are going above and beyond," Marcus said. "That means more than just promotions. We need to show our appreciation in ways that matter to them." Leah, one of the HR managers, nodded. "I agree. We've been hearing from employees that they'd like more opportunities for recognition, not just in terms of promotions, but in everyday acknowledgments of their work." "I'm thinking about introducing a new rewards program," Marcus said, "something that recognizes employees for their hard work, whether it's a public acknowledgement, bonuses, or opportunities for further development. We need to make sure that people feel valued, no matter what role they're in." Leah smiled. "That sounds like a great idea, Marcus. It could really help boost morale and show people that their efforts aren't going unnoticed." Over the next few weeks, Marcus and the HR team worked to create a comprehensive employee recognition program. The program included monthly awards for employees who had demonstrated leadership, innovation, or exceptional teamwork, as well as opportunities for professional development and mentorship. When the program was officially launched, Marcus held a company-wide meeting to announce it. "We've come a long way in changing the culture of this company," Marcus said to the gathered employees, "and now it's time to take it one step further. From today on, we're launching a new recognition program to make sure that every person who works hard and embodies the values of TechVision is rewarded for their efforts. Whether you're a senior manager or just starting out, your contributions matter." The employees responded with enthusiastic applause, and Marcus could see the excitement and pride on their faces. It was a moment that reaffirmed everything he had been working toward: the creation of a company where everyone felt valued and appreciated. As the meeting ended and the employees began to disperse, Marcus caught up with Angela. "Angela, I want you to know how much I appreciate the work you've been doing in the finance department," Marcus said. "You've really stepped up, and the way you've been leading your team has been incredible." Angela smiled, her eyes reflecting her gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus. It's been a lot of work, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished." "You should be," Marcus said, "and don't be surprised if you're one of the first to be recognized in the new rewards program." Angela laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." As Marcus left the meeting, he felt a sense of closure. The transformation at TechVision wasn't complete, But they were well on their way. The company had gone from a place where employees were overlooked and undervalued to one where every person's contribution mattered. And while there would always be challenges ahead, Marcus was confident that TechVision had become the kind of company he had always envisioned, a company that valued its people above all else. As Marcus entered the final stages of TechVision's transformation, he felt a mixture of pride and anticipation. The changes they had implemented were beginning to take root, and he could see the positive effects on the company culture. Employees were more engaged, communication had improved, and the atmosphere in the office felt lighter. However, he knew that sustaining this change would require continued effort and vigilance. The first major test of the new culture came when a significant issue arose involving a large project that had encountered unexpected challenges. The project, which had been spearheaded by one of the managers still adjusting to the new values, was at risk of falling behind schedule, putting both the client and the company's reputation in jeopardy. Marcus called an emergency meeting with the project team, determined to address the situation head-on. When everyone was seated, he began by acknowledging the difficulties they were facing. "I know that this project has been a challenge," Marcus said, looking around the table at the team members, who were clearly stressed. "But we need to figure out a way to get back on track. We can't afford to let our client down, and we need to support each other through this." Rachel, the project manager, spoke up. "We've hit some roadblocks, Marcus. The scope of the project has changed multiple times, and it's caused confusion within the team. Some of us are feeling overwhelmed trying to keep everything on track." Marcus nodded, understanding the pressure they were under. "I appreciate your honesty, Rachel. This is exactly the kind of situation where we need to lean on each other. Let's identify the specific challenges you're facing and see how we can address them together." As the team began to discuss the obstacles, Marcus encouraged open dialogue, reminding them that they were all in this together. He emphasized the importance of communication and transparency, which were foundational to the new culture he had been fostering. After a productive discussion, the team outlined a plan to streamline their efforts, clarify the project's objectives, and allocate additional resources where needed. By the end of the meeting, there was a renewed sense of determination among the team members. Once the meeting concluded, Marcus took a moment to check in with Henry and Angela, who were both involved in the project. "I'm really proud of how you're handling this situation," he said to them. "Your leadership is making a difference." "Thanks, Marcus," Henry replied. "We're doing our best to support each other and keep the lines of communication open. It's not easy, but I think we're getting there." Angela nodded in agreement. "This project has been tough, but I feel like we're learning a lot from it. It's great to have a team that feels comfortable speaking up about challenges." As they spoke, Marcus felt a sense of pride in the leaders he had cultivated. The shift in culture was no longer just an idea. It was becoming a reality, and it was clear that they were all committed to making it work. Over the next few weeks, the project team worked diligently to get back on track. The collaborative atmosphere that Marcus had fostered allowed them to tackle challenges head-on, leading to innovative solutions and strong teamwork. The client, impressed with the team's commitment and progress, expressed their satisfaction with the way TechVision was handling the situation. With the project successfully back on track, Marcus knew it was time to celebrate the achievements of the employees who had gone above and beyond during the transformation. He organized a company-wide event to recognize their hard work and reinforce the new culture. At the event, Marcus stood in front of the gathered employees, his heart full of gratitude. "Today, we're here to celebrate all of you, the hardworking individuals who have embraced this transformation and committed yourselves to making TechVision a better place for everyone. Your dedication and resilience have shown that change is possible when we work together." As he called out the names of employees who had excelled, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Each recognition was met with cheers and applause, reinforcing the idea that every contribution mattered. When it was Angela's turn, Marcus beamed with pride. "Angela, your leadership in the finance department has been exceptional. You've stepped up in ways that have inspired your team, and I'm proud to recognize you today." Angela walked to the front, visibly moved as she accepted her award. "Thank you, Marcus. I couldn't have done it without my amazing team. This recognition means a lot to me, and it reinforces what we've all been working toward." The event was a resounding success, creating a renewed sense of camaraderie among employees. Marcus watched as people connected, shared their stories, and celebrated not just individual achievements, but the collective progress of the company. As the festivities wound down, Marcus reflected on how far TechVision had come. The journey had been challenging, filled with tough decisions and hard conversations. But through it all, they had managed to create a culture that valued respect, inclusion, and accountability. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued to keep the lines of communication open. He checked in regularly with employees, held team-building events, and emphasized the importance of feedback. He wanted to ensure that the company never lost sight of its values, even as it grew and evolved. The final test of the transformation came when TechVision received a glowing review from the client involved in the earlier project crisis. The client expressed their appreciation for the open communication, responsiveness, and commitment to quality that TechVision had demonstrated throughout the process. Marcus shared the good news with the entire company. This is proof that our hard work is paying off. We've built a company that values its people, listens to its clients, and delivers results. This is just the beginning, and I'm excited for what's to come. As the employees cheered, Marcus felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The transformation of TechVision was not just about changing policies or procedures. It was about creating a community where everyone felt valued and empowered to contribute. As Marcus looked out at the smiling faces of his team, he knew that they had all come together to make a difference. TechVision was on the path to becoming a shining example of a company that truly cared for its employees and embraced a culture of collaboration and respect. The journey had been long, but they were finally where they needed to be. With a strong foundation in place, Marcus was excited to see how TechVision would continue to grow and evolve in the years to come.